Hey there, folks. So, this episode, as I mentioned in the last one, is going to be focused on some UI work. Now, with that, I just want to preface and say I haven't had a chance to fully dive into the potential issues with any weapons. I am still looking into that. Again, if I do find any problems, I am going to address those in its own separate video. But for now, as I mentioned, I want to start work on my UI. Now, let me pull up Krita here. All right, so here we have, I just took a screenshot of the player viewport from running around in my test level. You can see there's some artifacts up here in the top left, top right. That was just me hiding, removing the current really rudimentary HUD. So, what I'm wanting to do with this, and this is, as I mentioned last episode, it's going to be more conceptual design in this episode, and the next couple of episodes after this, we're actually going to seriously get into the code work itself. So, first and foremost, again, because this is intended to be as close to realistic of a survival simulator as I can make it, I have some ideas of how I want to try and keep the UI minimal. Now, first and foremost, one thing, as much as I don't want to, at the same time I understand the need, is going to be quick slots. And that's, actually I didn't name this quick slots. Thought I had named that. So this is just a rough representation of how I'm wanting that. This is just going to be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just some very basic quick slot options. And this is just going to be for things that the player could readily have available. And they're going to be like equipment points, things like a holstered pistol. Think Project Zomboid, for anyone familiar with that. I'm actually, a lot of this is being inspired by the Project Zomboid UI, because I find that is very minimalistic, but still very informative. So there's obviously going to be, and as I said, the quick slots. The other thing I want to do is have a little information thing in the corner. Now, I am intending to have opacity on these. I think about 75 is what I was working with. Get those set there. Just enough that you can see them. Now, what was this one? It was an empty one. Now, for this top right section, I want it to be, again, similar to Project Zomboid, but there was, what was it game? Was it Valheim? There was a very basic HUD mod that I had played with in Valheim that provided some information. So what I want here in the top right is going to be one of two things. Well, it's actually going to be a couple of different things. So there's going to be basic information. This is going to be if the player does not have something like, say, a watch or anything like that that is going to be able to provide accurate information. So you'll be able to say, oh, it's early afternoon, things like that, and it's warm. Because obviously the whole purpose with this is to provide information that a human would know naturally. Like, you're going to know roughly well, you can look up the sky in this game, in my game, and see roughly where the time is. But things like the temperature, you're also going to know that because you can feel it. But I also want the option to be able to have more detailed information. Again, very similar to Project Zomboid, where once you get a digital watch or a watch of any kind, it starts expanding that. So here, for example, you can see, oh, it's the time, the date, and the actual temperature outside. Now, weather effects, things like that, they have a visual representation. I'm not worried about including those. But then I ran into the issue of how do I want to handle things like you're getting hungry. I have the option to play sound effects, like stomach grumbling, stuff like that. And I do intend to include things like that. I don't want to rely 100% on that, though. So I was looking into the way the moodles work in Project Zomboid, where you have, oh, I'm hungry, I'm full, I've overeaten, things like that. And what I was thinking of there, now the exact placement I'm not 100% sure on, but down in one of the corners, be it the bottom left or the bottom right, I'm trying to not over clutter the screen, so I'm thinking probably the bottom left, or vertically on the one of the sides, again similar. The exact placement, obviously it's something that's going to be up to testing, feedback, stuff like that. But I'm hoping to have something similar to the moodles that are used in Project Zomboid. Also, for anyone who's played DayZ, you sort of understand these as well. However, I don't want them to be a permanent thing that they fill and go up and down, because that's too clear of an indicator in my mind. I want them to be incremental. So like they have, I'm going to turn off the other two here. I'm just going to leave the water one. So you are at, say, 50% thirst. I want it to be 50% opacity. You're at 100% thirst. I want it to be 0. I don't want you to see it. So this would slowly go up. As you're at like 10% thirst, I want it to be 90%. And things like that. Now, I also want to try and keep it so that it's not that the Moodle is always in the same place. Like, I do not want what I have here for the food Moodle to always be there. I don't want it so it's like, oh, I'm thirsty and I'm cold. I have this gap. I want it to be collapsing. Again, very similar to Project Zomboid's Moodles, where that as a Moodle becomes visible, becomes active, however you want it to describe it, it shows up in the list. So actually, I'm thinking right now, let me just enable these quickly again and move these. Move critter water. What I'm actually thinking of is I want these to be something like this. Again, placement is something that can be changed and everything like that. I'm actually going to resize these so they're probably a little smaller as well. So they're not so in your face, but at the same time, they're not completely unnoticeable. So something like, what do I want? Water, I want food. So something like that. So if we go back to this, basic info. So the HUD would look something like this. Now, again, this is my current iteration. With that, though, I'm going to throw a new level on here. There is a couple of things, and I'm going to change my color to, I'm going to use actual red. So there's a couple of things to take into consideration with this. First and foremost, our HUD is 3 parts. We have our quick slot down. Whoa, that is way too big. We have our HUD quick slot portion of our HUD down the bottom. We have our info portion of our HUD in the top right, and then our Moodle portion, wherever that may be, I'm going to say on the left-hand side of the screen. I'm going to do this for now. That is where we're going to have our dynamic Moodles. Now in here, with that, just recenter this again. That shows we have 3 areas that we're going to need to be updating, or 3 elements, depending how you want to look at it. There's also wanting to be like on-screen effects. Sorry, like I'm going to be toying with the idea of like desaturation if you're really low on blood, things like that. Potentially, if you're wearing like a mask that is very restrictive of your view, there's going to be. Let me try and simulate this. Get rid of you. So, say for example, you're wearing a gas mask. You're going to have something like this. Where's my fill? I don't use Krita enough. You're going to have something like that that obstructs your view, but your moodles are still going to be there. So let me drop this down to there. So you're going to have something like this as your ultimate screen effect. So we also have to consider layering. And for anyone who's familiar, that's your Z level. So that presents the issue of, let me just open a new one here. We need to determine how we want these to be stacked. So if we're, this is a really bad example, but if this is the actual rendered image of the background, so like what we're seeing is a game world, I'm actually going to do it at this level here. So that is like the camera's perspective. We're going to want to have a Z level here, which is the, let me grab text, screen masking. Set you to 24. Nope, 48. I want this to be higher. There we go. So we're going to have screen masking effect here. And then over and above that, we're going to have background. We're going to need our visible HUD. So that is things like our quick slot, our information here, and our moodles. So for the moodles, we're going to have obviously its own layer here. We're going to have, and again, these are very rough, so I do apologize for my amazing programmer art. So we're going to end up with something like that, with the moodles here, the quick slot here, and then that information window in the top right would be approximately there. This is a, excuse me, looking from the bottom of it to the top. Now with that, this is obviously a panel, so this is going to have a base setup, and then there's going to be, I'm going to get rid of these arrows for a second. So you're going to have like your 5 quick slots, 3, 4, 5. Okay, you get the idea. There's 4 there. We'll have our text display here, and then we're going to have moodles. Now, with that out of the way, my very bad description, the other thing we're going to need to account for is our moodle stack. So we want a moodle here, a moodle here, and a moodle here. If this moodle goes away, and yes, I'm using Moodle because it's the best term I can think of because it's what I'm referencing from Project Zomboid. If that Moodle is no longer present, we need this one to move up. So this Moodle stack needs to be dynamic. And how that would be is I want to have basically a list of all active Moodles. As a Moodle is removed, this comes out of the list, these move up. And then if this Moodle comes back, it goes back down here in the bottom of the list. So basically with that, the longest persistent Moodle is always going to be your top one. Because in that way, it's not like, oh, I'm hungry, all of a sudden I'm thirsty, and thirst goes at the top. It's going to be, I'm still very hungry, it's the priority one. Because in that way, the player is always going to be able to say, okay, this first item, be it here, here, across the bottom, whatever, is the one that is of the most concern. What it might not be. It is just the longest persistent Moodle. And these are going to include things like hunger, thirst, sleepy. I'm not going to go into the details of the complex needs of proteins, fats, things like that. That's just going to fall under hungry. Because that's something like I want the player to have to sort of, if they've got it enabled, consciously think, okay, I need fatty foods. I need protein, stuff like that. Like I've been eating nothing but bread for a week straight. Obviously, the character is going to be high on carbs, low on protein. Getting sidetracked here, but I want that to be something the player has to be cognizant of. Whereas the simple fact of being hungry, that one is just going to show up as a Moodle. But that's also going to be things like, again, Project Zomboid, huge inspiration for all of this. It's going to be things like they're sick, they're injured, they're bleeding, stuff like that. So, now, as I mentioned as well, I want to do this in C++. So, when we get into what's going to be the next episode where I start writing the code for this, there's a few different widget classes we're going to need. Let me undo a lot of this. So I'm going to switch my colors out here again. We're still at 5. So with that, there is going to be ultimately, I see 5 or 6 different widgets that we're going to need to make that are all going to go into the main HUD. So we're obviously going to want the screen masking. That's just going to be a widget of its own that is applied in a specific way. There's either a texture being applied to the screen or there isn't a texture being applied to the screen. In here, though, I'm also thinking, going back to, as I mentioned, things like the gas mask that we have with this setup. Well, you're wearing a gas mask. I want, like, for anyone who's played Metro, the Metro series, you're wearing a gas mask, you can get cobwebs and stuff stuck. You can get things like that. I'm wanting to account for that. So that's going to require, it's going to go there. What am I doing? X does that. A secondary background layer there. So this is going to be quite a, I don't want to say quite a complex. This is going to have some complexity to it. The next one, obviously, is we're going to need our, I need to be on square. We're going to need our Moodle section. That's going to be a couple of different ones. We're going to need our quick slot. That's going to be a couple of different ones. And then finally, we're going to need our information panel. So in here, I think this is, let me switch these around. I'll do this paintbrush. I think this is going to be potentially one widget class, and it's going to have a screen masking and then potential vision effect masking. Over here, this one, I think it's going to be two specific classes, widget classes. It's going to be the widgets, the Moodle stack itself, as well as then a secondary one, which is the individual Moodle, because there's going to be opacity effects, things like that. This one here, I think it's just going to be one class, because it's going to be, here's a render frame, there's 2 lines of text, let's populate those based on available information. And then the quick slot. So because it's going to eventually be drag and drop, and this UI stuff is also going to be expanding into things like the character screen, the inventory, menu, stuff like that. I think this is probably going to be 3 classes. There's going to be the base quick slot frame itself. There is going to be the individual quick slots, and then there's going to be the drop-in effect. Like I'm going to say this item is a quick slot. And that is going to have behavior very similar to DayZ in that regard, where you have your quick slot items. Yes, you can have them in your backpack. I'm starting the more I've been designing and figuring things out and trying to implement things as I go, the more I realize some of my approaches were not the best. Things like the item is always at the bottom of the bag unless you sort it, stuff like that. So, and that's part of game development, or software development in general, is like, oh yeah, this idea is great, and then you go to start implementing, and it's like, well, A, it's complicated, B, is it truly necessary? So, but yeah, so I think right now, just this basic initial HUD, before we do things like the character screen, inventory, the main menu, stuff like that, is going to be what's that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 7. We're going to be looking at 7 total widget classes I'm going to be creating. Now these are going to be pretty, well, I don't want to say pretty quick. I'm not overly experienced with working with widgets in C++, but I've been doing some background digging for other projects and trying to expand my horizons and learn a little more with widgets and stuff. So next episode is going to be starting to dig into these actual widgets. But anyways, folks, as I had mentioned, this was going to be more of a design episode. The actual code work is going to start happening in the next episode. So as always, if you have any comments, questions, concerns, suggestions, or more specifically for this episode, any feedback around the UI, anything you would prefer to see, any suggestions you may have, because right now I'm working with my personal opinion, and I want to obviously make this end user friendly. So if you have any feedback or suggestions about any of this, please let me know. Hop onto the Discord, let me know, drop a comment below, whatever works best for you. But as always, folks, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next episode.